Trail. I'm in my early 40s, and I've been hiking the Appalachian Trail for about 10 years now. I started hiking when me and my wife split up. It was, I don't know, a way to deal with it, I guess. You know, just me in the mountains, back to nature. Hiking became my escape, my therapy. Over the years, I've done sections of the Appalachian Trail here and there, but a few years ago, I started doing some serious long-distance hiking. Last autumn, I decided to take a week-long trip through the Virginia woods by myself, just to clear my head. The first night was perfect. I set up camp, had a nice fire, and everything felt normal. But the second night, things got weird. I was camped in a secluded spot about 15 miles from the nearest road, with nothing but the sound of the wind and the trees around me. That is until about 2 a.m., when strange noises woke me up. At first I thought it was just animals moving around, but something about the sounds was different. Footsteps crunching the leaves, moving around my camp. I couldn't help but think it sounded like a person, and they were close, really close, like they were deliberately circling my camp. I sat there in my tent, wide awake, listening. My mind started racing. Could it just be another hiker? Maybe someone who got lost? But the trail was quiet. There wasn't anyone else around for miles. I didn't want to panic, so I just kept still, trying to convince myself it was nothing. After a while, the noises stopped, and after about another hour, I finally got some sleep. When I woke up, my heart sank. My campsite was messed with. Nothing was stolen, but everything was out of place. My pack was moved, my stove was turned over, and my water bottle was poured out. Any doubt I had that there had been a person outside my tent the night before was gone. But I didn't want to ruin my entire trip, so I just packed up and moved on. The next night, things got worse. I set up camp earlier than usual, thinking I'd get some rest before nightfall. But as soon as darkness settled in, I started hearing it again. Footsteps. Closer this time, almost right next to me. I felt my pulse race. Something wasn't right. Around midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight, unholstered my gun, and stepped out of the tent. I shined the light around, heart pounding, and I caught a glimpse of someone, just for a second, darting off into the trees. I shouted for them to stop, but they didn't. In that moment, I didn't know what else to do, so I fired a warning shot into the air. The rest of the night was a blur. I couldn't help but think that whoever that was wasn't some hiker. The way they moved in the woods, how quiet they were, it was like they were a part of the forest itself. I barely slept, too on edge to even close my eyes. The next day, my hike was rough. My nerves were shot, but when I got to the area where I planned to stop for the night, I saw a couple with a tent set up. Young, probably in their early 20s. They seemed like the kind of people who were just out here for a night, not long distance like me. I told them about the strange events of the past 2 nights, but they didn't seem to believe me. I set up my tent about a quarter mile away from them. Honestly, knowing they were out there made me feel a little better. And when nothing happened that night, I thought maybe it was all over. But the next morning, everything changed. I woke up early, still feeling a bit uneasy, and decided to check on the couple. When I reached their campsite, I froze. The area was trashed. Their tent was torn apart, and there was blood everywhere. What I saw next is burned into my brain. They were lying there, 20 feet away, twisted in unnatural positions, covered in blood. I didn't need to check for pulses. I knew. The hours that followed were a blur. I contacted the ranger station, and soon enough, the police were there. At first, they thought I was a suspect, that I was involved. They seemed to dismiss my story about hearing the strange noises and seeing the person the night before. But thank God they found fingerprints on the couple's things that matched someone already in the system. A drifter wanted for violent crimes in Georgia and West Virginia. He had last been seen over a year ago. I was cleared, but what I saw that morning has haunted me ever since. I went home and tried to move on. I don't hike much anymore. Sometimes I hear the woods calling me, but I don't think they'll ever be my tranquil, therapeutic escape ever again. The Cabin of the Missing. The summer right after I graduated high school, my dad had this big idea to take me on a fishing and camping trip to Glacier National Park. I wasn't exactly excited. I wanted to spend that summer with the friends I'd be saying goodbye to and the girlfriend I was leaving behind. But my dad was really into it. It was one of those father-son bonding things. I didn't want to disappoint him, so I went along with it. As soon as we got to the park, though, something changed. I immediately saw what my dad had been talking about. The park was breathtaking, like something straight out of a postcard. The jagged peaks rose up on all sides, draped in snow, even in the middle of summer. The rivers were crystal clear, with emerald green pools surrounded by pine trees so thick they looked like a wall of green. Even the air smelled different, fresh, clean, almost sweet. We spent the first 3 days hiking through the forest, fishing along the rivers, pulling out trout that looked like they belonged in a magazine. It felt like time slowed down. I almost fainted when I saw my first grizzly bear, just a few hundred yards away. It was enormous, lumbering along the riverbank, completely indifferent to our presence. But if I thought I was scared then, well, I had no idea what scared meant. By the 4th day, we wanted to get a little further away from the other tourists at the campsite and get the real experience of the park. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and we wanted to make the most of it. So we decided to hike deeper into the wilderness. We packed water, snacks, and a few sandwiches, ready for a full day of exploring. This was the true wilderness. No tourists, no rangers, just miles and miles of untouched land. For a few hours, it felt like we were the only people on Earth. The forest was silent except for the occasional bird call. We were lost in it. Neither my dad or me go to church very often, but this natural wonder made me think there had to be some higher power out there. It was just too beautiful. We were just about ready to turn around and double back to camp when we found the cabin. It wasn't much. Old, worn down, like it hadn't been lived in for years, but it was still in one piece. My dad and I approached cautiously. Something about it felt a little off. We looked through the dusty windows, and it appeared empty. "Hello?" my dad called out, but there was no response. He tried the front door, and it creaked open, revealing an eerie quietness inside. We stepped in. The room was large, with high ceilings, and the light filtering through the grimy windows made everything look even older. The floor was covered in dust, and there was a faint, stale smell hanging in the air. The walls were decorated with a few faded hunting trophies. A deer head here, a pair of antlers there. Nothing unusual at first, but I started to feel like we shouldn't be here. Along one wall lay a pile of packs, just like ours. For a moment, I thought they might belong to hikers who were staying at the cabin. But the closer I looked, the more I realized they were dusty, worn, and looked abandoned, like they hadn't been touched in a long time. My dad took a closer look while I crossed the room to a small table in the corner. On top of the table lay a manila folder. I absent-mindedly opened it and found a bunch of newspaper clippings piled on top of each other. The first one was an article about a young married couple who had gone missing while camping in the park. My heart skipped a beat. I looked down at the other clippings. More disappearances. Families, hikers, campers, all vanishing without a trace. The articles spanned years, but they all shared the same eerie tone. People simply vanishing into the wilderness. At the same time, my dad had opened one of the dusty packs that was stacked against the wall. He seemed to be rifling through it, muttering something under his breath. Then he pulled out a wallet. It was old, the leather cracked. Inside, he found a driver's license. Andrew Carpenter, from Arizona. He read the name aloud, and I felt a chill run through my body. Among the pile of clippings was an article about Andrew and his girlfriend Melissa, who had gone missing at the park several years ago. My dad pulled IDs out of 2 other packs. Both the names matched missing persons cases from the articles. Suddenly the temperature in the cabin dropped, and I swear I could see my breath. "Let's get back to camp," my dad said, his voice shaky. He started putting everything back the way he found it, but I couldn't take my eyes off those clippings. We didn't say much as we hurried back to the campsite. My heart was pounding, and every rustle in the bushes made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be following us. Someone who might have been watching the whole time, just waiting for us to leave. It wasn't until we reached the camp that I felt even remotely safe. Having more people around made it seem like the world had finally returned to normal. The next morning, my dad contacted the park rangers. They seemed concerned and said they'd check out the cabin. That afternoon, we were taken to the ranger station, where we met with a special agent. They asked us about what we touched, if we had moved anything. It wasn't until later that I realized they were trying to account for our fingerprints. We had likely contaminated a crime scene. We never heard back from the rangers or the park police. It felt like the whole thing was just swept under the rug. But I knew what we'd found there. Whoever had lived in that cabin was responsible for all those disappearances. The person had been collecting newspaper clippings, like trophies. It seemed like the cabin hadn't seen anyone in months, maybe years, but I can't shake the feeling that someone was out there in the woods, and we barely escaped being the names in the next newspaper article. Search and rescue. I've been working for various state park systems in the southeastern United States for 15 years now, and I've been part of a search and rescue team for more than 10. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you never take the woods for granted. Even when they seem calm and peaceful, they can swallow you whole. It was late autumn when we were called to search for a missing hiker. His name was Derek, a guy in his late 20s who'd gone on a solo hike in the northern part of the park. He was last seen by a ranger the afternoon before. His roommates reached out that morning to say he never came home, and we located his car still parked in our lot. He had walked into the woods and vanished. I gathered my team, 2 more seasoned rangers, and Chloe, a rookie who'd been with us for about 6 months. She was eager, but still had a lot to learn. As we trekked through the dense forest, the air grew thick, humid even, despite the cool weather. Something about the trees here always seemed to close in on you, like they were watching. I wasn't the only one who felt it. We all kept glancing over our shoulders. Something felt off, although nobody wanted to say it. We had been out there for a little more than an hour when we found the first sign of Derek. A broken branch, snapped like a twig. Then his backpack, half buried in the underbrush. No hiker would leave their pack behind unless something forced them to. We found his shoe next, its sole caked in mud. But still, no Derek. As the hours dragged on, the forest seemed to grow even quieter, the rustling leaves replaced by an oppressive stillness. And then Chloe, who'd been ahead of us scouting, suddenly stopped responding. There was no answer on her radio, and when I shouted her name, I was met with nothing but silence. I felt a cold dread crawl up my spine. We split up, searching in different directions, calling her name, but she didn't respond. I felt nervous sweat on the back of my neck as I moved through the trees. The sound of leaves crunching beneath my boots echoed too loudly. I moved slowly, careful with each step, and then I found it. My toes dangled over the edge of a large hole, still partially covered with leaves and twigs, but with a gap giving away the trap's location. I brushed away the cover and found Chloe pinned in the hole, her leg twisted in a grotesque angle, her face pale and bloodied from where she'd hit her head. She was conscious, but barely. "Chloe," I called, kneeling beside the hole. Her eyes fluttered open, panic-stricken. I fell," she said. "I thought you left." Her words were slurred. I told her not to worry and just maintain her strength. I quickly radioed for help, and we worked to get Chloe out of the hole. It was a struggle. It was clear this trap wasn't intended for any animal. It was meant for a person, and it caught one. As we helped Chloe to safety, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, just out of view. The woods felt like they were closing in, the trees leaning forward as if waiting for something. We had to call off the search for Derek. Our priority was getting Chloe to medical care. The next day, a new team was sent to continue the search. The woods were thick with fog, and as they moved deeper, they reported finding more traps big enough to catch a person. But there was no sign of Derek, and no sign of whoever had set the traps. Eventually, the search was called off. Derek was never found, and whoever had been out there setting traps to catch humans, they were never caught. Some things, I suppose, are better left undisturbed, but something Chloe said to me once she had recovered a bit still haunts me. There was someone there, she said, sitting up in her hospital bed. When I fell in the hole, someone was there, standing over me, looking down. At first I thought it was you, but then I heard you calling for me from far away, and whoever it was, they disappeared. I patted her hand and told her she was safe, but I'm not sure I believe that. I'm not sure any of us are safe as long as we keep going into those woods, because to this day, anytime I'm out there, I can't shake the feeling that I'm still being watched. Thanks for listening, friends. If you enjoyed these allegedly true Deep Woods horror stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time with more whispers from the pines.